Our guest this week on Veterans Chronicles is retired U.S. Navy Commander Dean "Diz" Laird. A veteran of 3 different wars, he is an ace aviator and is the only one known to have recorded kills in both the European and Pacific theaters of World War II. And Commander, thank you very much for being with us.
My pleasure.
Let's start at the very beginning for you. Where were you born and raised?
I was born in the little town of Loomis, California, which is about 30 miles east of Sacramento. In 1921 I was born. From a long line of Lairds and Smythes. My family had been settled there since before the gold rush.
Wow.
And participated in the gold rush. My grandparents both were born there, and my dad was born there. Had a lot of Lairds that lived in that area for a while, but now there's none.
Now, the nickname Diz, did you get that as a kid or after you joined the service, and is it because of the pitcher, Dizzy Dean?
It is because of the pitcher, Dizzy Dean, and Dean was what my mother named me. And I played baseball when I was in high school, and of course, as soon as the kids knew my name was Dean, I became Dizzy, and they called me Dizzy a lot. And I got in the Navy when I came to my first fighter squadron. My CO, I went in for an interview with him, and he said, "Do you have a nickname?" And I told him, "Not really." I said, "I used to be called Diz in high school." And he said, "That's good enough for me. You're Dizzy from now on." So.
Aviators, you got to have the handle, right?
Yeah.
So you joined just after Pearl Harbor was attacked, correct?
Yes.
What was your reaction to the attack?
I was kind of shocked. I never expected it. Of course, I guess a lot of other people didn't expect it either. And I found out about it. I got up in the morning, that Sunday morning, and drove out to the Auburn airport. I was going to rent an airplane and go fly on. I had a pilot's license at that time. They thought I was crazy. "Do you know what's going on?" "What's going on?" I know all I want to do is rent an airplane. And, well, we're at war. Pearl Harbor's been attacked. And everything was news to me. And that's when I found out about the war.
Would you have joined the service anyway, or did that make your decision for you?
No, I was planning on joining the Army Air Corps. I had papers out for it. My brother and I were both talking about it. And it was about the same time that I saw a newsreel in which they showed a battleship with a makeshift flight deck on it and an airplane taking off. And then they showed a picture of our first carrier, the Langley, and an airplane landing aboard it. And I thought, damn, that's got to be more fun than anything. I think I'll just go join the Navy. So I did.
Where did they send you first to train?
I started out at Oakland, California. The Navy had it was called the Naval Reserve Air Base on the airfield at airport at Oakland. And that's where I reported and stayed for about 2 months.
What planes were you flying at first?
Well, we were flying the N3Ns there. N3N was built by the Navy. The Navy had an aircraft factory in Philadelphia. It was built pretty much a copy of the Stearman, and then both the Navy and the Army Air Corps used the Stearman as a trainer. But the Navy ended up using more N3Ns, which they built themselves in their factory in Philadelphia.
Did you like flying the N3Ns?
Oh yeah, it was fun to fly.
And then how soon did you get deployed?
Oh well, it took me almost a year to get to my first squadron. I stayed in Oakland for about, as I say, January, end of February. They sent me to Dallas Naval Air Station. I was in a pool there with a whole bunch of other guys from different bases. They call them elimination bases, like Oakland, Seattle, Long Beach, St. Louis, Kansas City, all over the country. They had these elimination bases. And then when people would finish there, they'd send them to a pool, and usually at Dallas. And then from there, they would send them to the two main training stations, which was Corpus Christi and Pensacola. After a month in Dallas, I was sent to Pensacola, where I did most of my training.
And so that Pensacola was the last stop?
Well, no. I did primary training there and basic training there and instrument training. Got an instrument card. And then they sent me to advanced training, which was done in Miami, Opelika Naval Air Station down there. We did advanced training in SNJ, Texan, and we finished that. We went into a service type airplane, which was the Brewster Buffalo, the F-2A, and that was the first real airplane that I flew. It had one of those great big round engines, you know, and made a lot of noise, and had about 1,200 horsepower, and it was a lot of airplane.
Tough adjustment or no?
No. No, I found that no matter what airplane it is, they all have a throttle over here and a stick, and if you want to go fast, you pull on the throttle, and you want to go up, you pull on the stick, and you want to go down, you push on the stick, and it doesn't matter whether it's an N3N or an F4 Phantom or what, they all fly the same. Maybe a few little things different, but I figure you can fly one, it wouldn't take you very long to learn how to fly the other.
So you're sent to the European theater first, correct?
Well, yes. I finished Miami in, I think it was about the 5th of October, of 42. Went to Norfolk. I had to go through carrier qualifications, which we did in the SNJ Texan. And then I reported to my squadron, which was Fighter Squadron 441, and we were attached to the carrier Ranger, which was CV4, fourth carrier we had, the first carrier we had that was built from the keel up as a carrier, and it was not the greatest carrier in the world. We trained out of Norfolk for let's see, December, January, February, March. We did a couple of short little deployments, local deployments on the Ranger, just to build up a little carrier experience. And then in early April, we departed Norfolk. And we eventually ended up a month or so later in Argentia, Newfoundland, where we stayed for another, I don't forget, 3, 4 months, 5 months maybe. And we left there, we went back to Quonset Point, Rhode Island, and I don't know why, but we did, and said goodbye to our wives, and we took off again, and we didn't know where we were going until we were halfway there. We were told we were going to Great Britain, we ended up in Scapa Flow. Scapa Flow was the anchorage for the British Home Fleet, and we operated with and actually we were controlled by the commander of the British Home Fleet for several months while we were over there.
Mr. Laird, let's pause right there. We'll take a quick break on Veterans Chronicles and be right back with Dean Diz Laird, veteran of World War II, an ace pilot who is the only person to have recorded kills in both the European and the Pacific theaters. Welcome back to Veterans Chronicles on the Radio America Network. I'm Greg Corombos, and I'm honored to be joined right now by Dean Diz Laird. He is a retired U.S. Navy commander, served in 3 different wars, and is the only ace pilot in World War II to record kills in both the European and the Pacific theaters. And sir, we, in the previous segment, just talked about the path to you getting to Great Britain and the start of the European theater. You were just saying in the break, though, that there was an interesting twist when you got to Newfoundland.
Well, yes, we had been there for a couple of months, and some bright fellow on our staff got the idea that we should be night carrier qualified. We complained about it and explained that we loved carrier operations during the day, but we preferred the company of women during the night. We were not too thrilled about going out and flying off a carrier at night. We lost our argument. They decided to brief us. They would call us all down to the officer's wardroom. The briefing officer was the executive officer of the ship, who was the only one aboard the ship who had ever made a night carrier landing. It turns out that he made one, and it was not the best landing in the world. And that was about 8 or 9 years earlier. When we finished his briefing, they said, "Okay, you guys man your airplanes." And instead of sending off, like they do now, maybe 4 or 5 or 6 airplanes and just keep them in this pattern and let them make landings, they launched the whole air group, all 72 of us. I was near the last of the fighters. The fighters were first to start landing. The first night I didn't get into the landing pattern even. We ran low on fuel after circling for 2 or 3 hours, and we had to go into Argentia to land. In fact, almost every airplane that we launched ended up in Argentia. We flew back the next day, and they proceeded to tell us what lousy aviators we were, and told us to man our airplanes again, and we went through the same routine again that night, and for several more nights after that. And we got to know Argentia at night pretty well, but that's where we spent it. They finally gave up on qualifying everybody, and I'm not sure if anybody. It might have been 1 or 2 pilots in each squadron that got qualified, but the rest of us had maybe 2 landings or 3 landings, or some people maybe not even any. But
well, let's go back to Great Britain, because that's where we left off at the end of the last segment. How long were you there before you got engaged in the skies over Europe?
Let's see, we got over there in June.
June of 43?
Yes.
Okay.
We'd go out, did a lot of operating up along the Norwegian coast, which wasn't the greatest. It was in October when we first got our first combat action.
What was that like after all this training, after all this anticipation, when you actually engaged with the enemy?
As it was, I wasn't scheduled to fly that day, and they had a combat air patrol out, and they were looking for a target which our radar showed on the screen And this flight couldn't find it. The weather was kind of crummy. They were bringing them back aboard and we're going to send a relief flight out. I should tell you that I used to get seasick. That ship, it wasn't this type of thing, it wouldn't bother me, but it was just a gentle thing, like you might get in a rowboat out on the bay, and I don't know if you've done that or not, but I was always subject to motion sickness, even in the car as a little kid. So I used to volunteer for every flight I could get. And I found out finally that there were 2 or 3 pilots that seemed to have more engine trouble before takeoff than the rest of us. And I found that if we always had a spare pilot up there, if we had a flight of 4, say, we had 5 airplanes ready to go, and we'd put a spare pilot in there, and if one of these went down, this guy would go. So I got the smart idea, well, it's a good way to get flight time, and almost always the spare pilot gets off. So I used to volunteer to be the spare pilot whenever I could. Well, I did this day. Sure enough, I got airborne. When we went out, we relieved that other group that had been out there looking a couple of hours, and as I say, the weather was rather crummy. And they vectored us around looking for this bogey out there, and we couldn't find it either. Finally, they said, "Oh, come on back to the ship." And they started back, and they said, gave us a signal, Buster. Buster meant everything forward, get back as fast as you can. My airplane, Buster, was 10 or 15 knots slower than anybody else's Buster, and I couldn't keep up with them. But when they told us to come on back, I knew that there was a bogey out there somewhere, because this radar operator we had aboard the ship was excellent, and I'd never known him to be wrong. If he thought he had a little target out there, there was a target there. It was an airplane. So while we were heading back towards the fleet again, I kept looking backward. I was falling behind anyway, full throttle. Kept looking backward, back where we'd come from. And sure enough, I saw this airplane come out from behind a big cloud, huge cloud, and there were clouds all over, but came out from behind this big cloud, went around the front of it, and went around the back, on the back side, right, from the right. So I called the tally-ho and told him what I saw, and my section leader turned immediately, and I went with him, because we were this way, so I was caught up with him on the turn. I explained to him exactly what I saw, and so we headed towards the side of this huge cloud from which this airplane had appeared, and sure enough, here he came again. And it was a Junkers 88, one of Germany's best bombers. He apparently saw us about the same time we saw him, because he turned immediately and headed south, which I think was the direction of Germany. We went chasing after him and finally caught him, and my leader went up on the right side to sit in position to make a high side run, and I went up to the left side. The leader came in, he fired, and I came in and I fired, and we had him smoking. And we came up, and the leader came back again, and I came in again, and this time I tried to aim where I thought most likely place that they would have a fuel tank. And I think I guessed right, because while I'm firing, this airplane, the Ju-88, just exploded in a big ball of fire. A lot of extraneous airplane parts flying in every direction. And that was the end of him.
Diz, let me stop you right there. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back on Veterans Chronicles. We're back on Veterans Chronicles. I'm Greg Columbus, honored to be joined by Diz Laird. He is a ace pilot from World War II. He had kills in both the European and Pacific theaters. And, sir, we were just talking about the bomber you took down very early on in your time in the European theater. What did that feel like?
Well, I was kind of elated because that's what I was supposed to do. I was glad that my training had paid off. Anyway, we headed back towards the fleet, and they gave us another vector out in the opposite direction. This time, we'd gone, maybe 25, 30 miles, and we came to just a black wall of water, rain, and we were spread out like this again. The leader was going full blower, and I was tail end Charlie. I couldn't keep up at all. He got to this line squall, and he turned left and paralleled it. He and the second guy went with him, and the third guy did. And about then, I saw inside that squall a strange airplane going in the opposite direction. And I called Tally-Ho, told him what I saw, went up there, and I turned and started following him. I hoped I was following him. I couldn't see anything. The visibility was terrible. But I was flying down fairly low, probably ceiling high off the water. I had to try to keep the water visible so I wouldn't run into it. And the visibility was really bad. I've gone along there for a few minutes. All of a sudden, at about 11 o'clock position to me, here came an airplane. And it was pretty close. And I got a chance to see what it was. It was a twin engine, and it had twin floats right underneath the engines, a monoplane, one wing, whatever that means. I didn't have too much time to aim or get any real assessment on it. I had pulled up and put my gun sight up, trying to hit his port engine. I pulled up and I pulled the trigger and did a brrr, and just a short burst is all I got, and I went by him like that. I had to duck because I thought my tail sticking up was going to hit him. I was that close.
Wow.
I missed him, except I blasted the hell out of his pontoon that was underneath that port engine. Then I turned around to follow him, and I figured out that he was doing somewhere around 300 knots, and so was I. And then I got behind him, and I could not catch him. That airplane was a fast-moving bird, and the Wildcat wasn't known for its great speed, but it would do 300 or better knots, that is. Well, anyway, I'm behind him, but I know I'm out of range. Our machine guns were good. Were 50 calibers were good for about 1,000 feet. Anything over that, it was just luck if you hit anything, or you hit what you were aiming at. And I gave a couple of bursts, and I couldn't tell where they went. We were both going about the same speed, and I figured I was out of range anyway, and the tracers would burn out before they ever got up there. I was sure I wasn't hitting him. I kept following him, trying to catch him, and I'd drop down and pick up some speed this way, and go and try to pick up a few hundred yards on him, and I just it was almost impossible. I'd pull back up, and of course I'd lose speed when I pull up, and I'd lose that distance too. Finally, I said to myself, you know that the bullets drop 1,000 feet, they drop about 3 feet. Why don't you go up and aim maybe 10 or 15 or even 20 feet above him and see if you can lob some up there to hit him. And I didn't know how high to shoot or anything. This was a real guesswork. We were still both going same airspeed, and I pulled up, aimed over the top of him, and I squeezed off a long burst. I don't know if it hit him or not. I couldn't tell. The tracers burned out before they got there. And I couldn't tell whether the bullets dropped behind him or went over the top of him or hit him or anything. All of a sudden, he seemed to slow down, dropped his flaps, heading down to land, make a water landing. He was on his floats. And I thought, well, maybe I did hit him. He touched down, and when he did, that port float just collapsed. There wasn't much left of it to begin with when I hit it that first time. It collapsed, the left wing dropped, hit the water, and he just cartwheeled. Came to a stop. By the time I got up there, the 3 crewmen had gotten out. They were all together beside the fuselage, and they waved to me, and I gave them a salute, and we circled, and our leader came along, and he called back to home base, see if they'd send a destroyer over to pick these guys up, and they said no, they didn't want them. Well, it wouldn't have done any good. That water was so cold that they probably were dead within 15 minutes anyway, 20 at the most. The reason I say that is just a week or so before that, we had a pilot come in making a landing, and he got in very close, and he started drifting right to left, and he landed and he went over the side. Well, he got out of the airplane right away. We had a destroyer, a British destroyer, was flying a plane guard position back here about 100 yards. He was right there within 20, 30 seconds at the most. Threw him a line, and he was already so cold he couldn't hold on to it. So they put a boat in the water with 4 sailors and a coxswain. The sailors, they got to him, they went in the water, and they got him out, and they got each other back aboard the boat, got back to the destroyer, and they were so cold from the hypothermia, all 5 of them, 4 sailors and our pilot died. I was pretty sure those Germans were not going to survive very long, not long enough for a destroyer to come from an hour or so away to get them.
Sir, let me just, in our last couple of minutes here, I want to get to a couple different parts of your story. Real quickly, how did you end up getting transferred to the Pacific?
Oh, well, we came home let's see, that was in October 3rd, as a matter of fact. We came home, I got back to Quonset Point on the 5th of December. We traded in our Wildcats and got Hellcats. We moved up to Ayer, Massachusetts, where we trained for a couple of months in our new planes, and then we went to San Diego, got on a Jeep carrier, which carried us out to Hawaii, and we went down to Hilo, where we spent a couple of months in training again in our new airplanes, and then we were transported again by a Jeep carrier out to Saipan, where we met up with the new carrier. And we had just received all brand new airplanes, brand new F-6, F-5s. And while we were on that Jeep carrier going out to Saipan, each pilot had an airplane, and we waxed them, the whole airplane, head to toe. With a good wax job, we could increase our airspeed by 10 to 15 knots. And so we really worked on those things. The skipper of that ship that picked us up told us he already had a whole bunch of airplanes aboard and he didn't want those. So we had to leave them. Somebody else got the benefit of all our work. Got aboard that carrier, went down to the Philippines, joined up with Halsey. We stayed on that ship for about a month, and then we moved over to the Essex, and the other ship went home and had to have a few little things fixed before it came back in January. So we spent the rest of our cruise on Essex. We got aboard Essex about the 1st of October, and we stayed on there until April. They kicked us off, replaced us with another air group. And I didn't want to go because I knew damn well that the next big operation had to be Okinawa, and I wanted part of that. So I went up to my squadron commander's cabin, and I don't want to go. I'd like to get a transfer to this new group that's just replacing us right now, and stay aboard Essex. And Jesus, he flipped his lid. Told me I was crazy. Screamed at everybody in the ship, could hear him, I think. And suffering from combat fatigue, and I did all this crap. He said, "I won't approve anything like that. You're crazy. You're crazy." I thought I was going to have to scrape him off the overhead. And anyway, he said, "You go down and get your gear and get down to the quarterdeck. We're leaving this ship, and you're going with us." So I went with him. We came back to San Diego. That was the end of that cruise. From there on, I didn't do my well. I got orders to a new squadron up in Brunswick, Maine, called Experimental Fighter Squadron 200. I don't know where the other 199 were, but we had 200 now. And our job, we worked with units of the Atlantic Fleet, destroyers, cruisers, people like that. We acted as kamikazes. And we'd make kamikaze runs on them and pull out at the last minute. They were trying to develop tactics to beat the kamikaze. And we had a lot of fun doing that. Just buzzed the hell out of those guys. I'm sure they were scared more than we were. And then the end of the war came. And they didn't need that training for kamikazes, so they moved us down to Norfolk and changed us into a regular fleet squadron. We stayed there for another 6 or 8 months and moved to Atlantic City, and was there for a little over a year, and that's when I got orders to the Navy's 1st Jet Squadron.
I'd love to get into that story. Unfortunately, we're just about out of time. So, real quickly, what does it mean to you to be an ace pilot?
I guess except for the fact that not everybody becomes an ace, it doesn't really mean much at all. It proves one thing, that you had to be a pretty good pilot and a good gunner. And really, that's about all it does prove.
Well, sir, we thank you for your time here. We thank you most of all for your service to our nation. And as folks will know if they read more on you, it wasn't just World War II, it was Korea, Vietnam, all the way to the early 1970s. So thank you very much for your time and your service. Diz Laird, retired U.S. Navy commander, veteran of 3 wars, ace aviator, and the only man to record kills in both the European and Pacific theaters of World War II. This is Veterans Chronicles.